kind of wild out there right now, huh? I mean, look around the globe, and things feel shaky at best.
Yeah, the global economy definitely seen some choppy waters.
With all these new tariffs coming out of the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. Sending shockwaves, really, through pretty much every market.
Makes you wonder, how can any country plan for growth with all this uncertainty swirling around?
It's a tough question, for sure. But, there's this really interesting situation unfolding right now with India, almost like a counter narrative to all this global hand-wringing.
India? Okay, I'm intrigued. What's going on over there?
Well, despite all the chaos from these tariffs, India's finance ministry is still projecting some pretty solid growth. For their fiscal year 2025-26, that'd be April to March, for us, they're looking at something between 6.3 and 6.8%.
Seriously? That's huge, especially when the rest of the world seems to be bracing for impact. What's their secret sauce? How do they think they can pull that off?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got some really insightful information from a couple of high-ranking officials within India's finance ministry. They've given us a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, into how they're thinking about the challenges ahead.
Real insider knowledge. I like it. So let's unpack this a bit. 6.3 to 6.8% growth. For an economy the size of India's, we're not talking small potatoes here, right? I mean, what does that kind of growth actually look like on the ground?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. When you're dealing with an economy of that scale, those numbers translate into some serious economic activity. We're talking about a potentially massive increase in jobs, more investment flowing into different sectors. It's the kind of expansion that could really solidify India's place on the global stage.
Okay, so that's the good news. But I have to imagine there were some big ifs involved here. It can't all be sunshine and rainbows, right? What are some of the things that could derail this optimistic forecast?
Well, one of the biggest wild cards is something India relies on heavily: crude oil.
Ah, yeah, oil, global commodity, always causing a stir. How does that factor into India's calculations?
Their projections are based on the assumption that oil prices will stay below $70 a barrel. Now, this is a pretty crucial point because India imports something like 80% of the oil it consumes.
80%. Whoa, that's a huge dependence on external sources.
Right. So you can see why they're keeping a close eye on those oil markets. If prices spike, it's going to have a ripple effect throughout their entire economy.
Explain that ripple effect for me. What happens in India if those oil prices go north of that $70 mark?
Well, first and foremost, it means more expensive fuel, and we all know how that goes: higher transportation costs, goods get more expensive to move around.
And those costs ultimately get passed on to the consumer.
Exactly. And suddenly you've got an inflation problem on your hands. So keeping oil prices under control is really key for them to hit that growth target.
I see. It's like they're walking this tightrope, trying to balance their ambitious growth goals with this huge unknown hanging over their heads. What are the odds they can actually thread that needle?
It's a gamble, that's for sure. I mean, predicting oil prices, that's a fool's errand if there ever was one. Global events, OPEC decisions, heck, even the weather can throw a wrench into things. It's definitely one of those keep your fingers crossed kind of situations.
Speaking of global wrenches, let's talk about these U.S. tariffs. A 26% tax on imports from India. That's got to sting.
Yeah, it's a pretty hefty levy, no doubt about it. And it's not just India, of course. The U.S. has imposed these tariffs on a bunch of countries. But for the sake of our discussion today, let's focus on how it's impacting India specifically.
Sounds good. And now, I'll admit, I'm no trade expert. Break this down for me.
Right.
What's the rationale behind imposing tariffs? What's the intended outcome?
Well, at the most basic level, a tariff is a tool to protect domestic industries. By making those imported goods more expensive, you're giving your local producers a competitive edge.
I see. Level the playing field, make those American-made products more attractive.
Right. And of course, there's also the revenue aspect. Tariffs generate income for the government, which can be used for various purposes.
And how did the markets react to this? I remember seeing some headlines about some pretty big drops in Asian markets after the announcement.
Oh yeah, it definitely sent ripples through the global financial system. The Nikkei in Japan, the Shanghai Composite in China all took a hit. Shows you how interconnected everything is these days. One policy move by a major player like the U.S., and suddenly everyone's scrambling to adjust.
It's a bit unnerving, honestly. All this uncertainty, the fear of a trade war, makes you wonder if anyone's really in control.
I hear you. But here's the thing about India's reaction to all of this. They're projecting an almost unsettling calm. Like they're not fazed in the slightest.
Really? Amidst all this, they're just chill. How does that even make sense?
Well, one of the officials we spoke to actually used the phrase solid as a rock to describe their fiscal position, their budget, their deficit. They seem pretty confident that they've got things under control.
Hmm. Solid as a rock. That's quite a statement. But even with sound finances, there's got to be some sectors that are feeling the heat from these tariffs, right? Not every industry can just shrug this off.
That's very true. The overall economic picture might look stable, but that doesn't mean everyone's immune. There are definitely specific industries that rely heavily on exports to the U.S., and they're likely facing some serious challenges right now.
Any examples come to mind? Any particular industries that are really feeling the pinch?
One that springs to mind is the diamond industry in Surat, a major hub for diamond cutting and polishing, and a significant portion of their exports go directly to the U.S.
So what happens to them when those exports suddenly become 26% more expensive? I imagine that throws a wrench into their business model.
Yeah, it's not pretty. We're talking about a potential drop in demand, a buildup of inventory, and worst case scenario, job losses. For a city like Surat, where so many livelihoods are tied to the diamond industry, that's a real concern. It shows how even if the overall economy is doing okay, these targeted trade actions can have a devastating impact on certain communities.
I imagine the Indian government's feeling the pressure to do something to help these folks out. Any indication of what kind of support they might offer?
Well, they've been talking about these duty remission schemes. It's basically a way to give exporters a bit of a tax break.
Like a rebate on the materials they import.
Exactly. The idea is to lower their overall production costs so they can remain competitive even with those tariffs in place. And the official we spoke to hinted that they're open to doing more if these initial measures aren't enough.
So they're willing to step up and help out. That's good to hear. But let's talk about India's overall response to these tariffs. I find it intriguing that they haven't immediately retaliated. You'd think there would be some pressure to hit back, impose their own tariffs on U.S. goods.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it seems they're taking a more measured approach. From what we're hearing, their focus is on dialogue and negotiation. They're hoping to hammer out a trade deal with Washington that might mitigate the impact of these tariffs.
The diplomatic route, huh?
Yeah.
Taking the high road. I gotta respect that. But it does make you wonder what's happening behind the scenes. What are these negotiations like? What are they asking for?
Good questions, and unfortunately, we don't have all the answers yet. Getting an official statement from the finance ministry at this point is proving to be tricky. It sounds like they're absolutely swamped dealing with all the fallout from these tariffs.
Fair enough. I can only imagine the workload they're facing right now. But all this talk about trade deals and global economic pressures makes you wonder, has India always been this adept at navigating choppy waters?
They've certainly had their fair share of experience. You're talking about a massive, diverse country with a history of facing down economic challenges. They've kind of built up this resilience over the years, a knack for adapting and overcoming.
So is that what we're seeing here? A nation drawing on its past experiences to chart a course through this current storm?
It's definitely a possibility. And, it's not just about resilience. They're also pretty proactive. Look at those duty remission schemes. They're not waiting for things to fall apart before taking action.
I appreciate that. But let's be real here for a second. They might have all the resilience and proactivity in the world, but if oil prices skyrocket or those U.S. tariffs really start to bite, it's hard to imagine they can come out of this completely unscathed. What's the worst-case scenario here? What are we talking about?
Well, like we discussed, if oil goes way above $70 a barrel, inflation becomes a real threat. That could hurt consumer spending, make businesses hesitant to invest, and put a damper on their growth aspirations. And if those U.S. tariffs really start to impact those key export sectors, you could see a slowdown in overall economic growth. Those job losses in places like Surat, those could become a reality.
And even with government support, there's only so much they can do to shield everyone from those kinds of impacts.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act, no doubt about it. They're relying on both internal and external factors to play in their favor.
So it sounds like India's growth story is far from a done deal. It's a work in progress, with plenty of potential pitfalls along the way.
It is. They've laid out an ambitious plan, but they're at the mercy of global forces that are largely beyond their control. It's a reminder that even in a world where countries seem to be going it alone, we're all interconnected.
And that, my friends, is the global economy in a nutshell. One giant interconnected web of cause and effect.
A web where a decision made in one capital city can send shockwaves to the far corners of the earth.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a lingering question. What other unforeseen factors could emerge in the coming year to influence India's economic trajectory? What are the potential surprises lurking around the corner that might throw them off course? It's a thought-provoking question, and one that I'm sure we'll be revisiting in the months to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, folks, and be sure to stay tuned for more as this story continues to unfold.